Hello everyone, this is part 2 of the photo composite in Photopea. Let's get started. We are going to create a cast shadow for the deer. To do a cast shadow, what I am going to do is duplicate the deer layer. So I am on my original deer layer. I'll call this one the big deer, and my deer copy back there will be the small deer. All right, I'm going to duplicate the big deer. Layer, duplicate layer. All right, so now I have a copy of it. If I hide the other one, you can still see it, right? Or if I get the move tool, there it is, there's the copy. All right, but I want it to stay exactly where it was. So let's jump back in the history palette. All right, now I'm on the big deer copy. I'm gonna hide the original deer. So I'm gonna turn off the eyeball. So we're on the copy, and I'm gonna go to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to change the hue, I'm going to change the lightness. I'm going to drag the lightness all the way to the left to make it a black silhouette. And click OK. All right, if I turn back on the regular deer, you'll see that it's actually behind the new deer copy. So I'm going to rename this Deer Shadow. And I'm going to put the original deer on top of the shadow. So now see in my layers palette, the original big deer is now on top of the deer shadow in the layers palette. All right, next I want to distort the shadow. So under or on deer shadow, let's go to the deer shadow layer. If you want to, you can hide the original deer so that you can see your shadow. And I want to pull this silhouette down to the ground. Now think about where your light source is coming from. In this photograph, my light source, I think, is coming from sort of the top. It must be high in the sky because all these rocks are lit up on the top. So technically, if the sun is high in the sky, then the shadow will fall, either in front of or behind the deer. Or it looks kind of like there's hard sun coming at these. So that means the sun's coming from the left. I'm going to pull my shadow to the right. Shadows go the opposite of the light source. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and first I'm going to start with Distort. All right, so I'm going to start with Edit, Transform, Distort. Now with Distort, I get the bounding box around the deer. I'm going to take this middle little box and I'm going to pull it down. All right, so now my shadow is down. I can hit the check mark. And if I turn back on the big deer, you'll see, all right, so now the shadow's on the ground. If you wanted to pull it right or left, the opposite side of the light source, let's go back to Edit, Transform, and in Photoshop, you would have skew, but in Photopea, we don't have skew. So instead, I'm gonna try to use warp. And what it's going to do is kind of warp the shadow, which I don't want, but what I do want is for it to skew to the left or the right. So I could try using warp, and I think that I don't like that. So I'm going to not use warp and instead try out Edit, Transform, and how about we try out Perspective. Now, perspective is actually going to make it look like it goes back in space or forward in space. But let's try out to the side. See how it's transforming back or forward? All right, so that's not exactly realistic, but it's kind of interesting. All right, so my light source is coming from the top, so I'm just going to leave that right there and click the check mark. All right, now the problem is that when I distorted it, it moved the feet. So the feet have to line up. Let's go get the zoom tool. Let's zoom in. Go to your shadow layer, get your move tool, and let's move the feet around. Now, here is a good time to use warp. So let's say you've moved it and the feet still don't match up. let's go back to Edit, Transform, Warp. All right, and now for warp, now I can just kind of grab the area near the feet and just pull a little bit to match up the feet. Okay, that looks better. I'm going to click check. Okay, now my shadow is really dark. It looks like a painted black shape on the ground. I need to make this lower opacity. Let's go to the deer shadow layer. Let's go to the opacity in the layers palette, and let's reduce the opacity a little bit so that it's see-through, looks more like a shadow. All right, so now it's see-through and it still has really hard edges. So I'd like to soften the edges. Shadows have hard edges when the sun is really bright. But if the sun is not so bright, let's say it's later in the day or early in the morning, shadows will appear softer. If you'd like to soften your shadow, let's go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. So that was Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. All right, and now you can see right away, you can reduce or increase the radius of the blur. And the more you blur, the more it'll fade away. So I think I'm going to keep mine around 2. And that gives it a little bit of a soft blur. And I'll click OK. All right, I'm going to zoom out. All right, and now time to do that for the other deer, my smaller deer. All right, let's do it again. I'm going to go to the small deer layer. I'm going to duplicate it. Layer, duplicate layer. All right, there it is. I'm going to rename that layer small deer shadow. All right, I'm going to hide the real deer, and now it's time to make the small deer shadow a black silhouette. Image, adjustments, hue, saturation. All right, I'll take my lightness slider, drag that all the way to black, to the left, and OK. All right, time to distort. Now I distorted down for the other one, so I need to do the same exact thing. Shadows usually all match. One light source outside, up in the sky. Edit, transform, distort. Okay, so I'm going to take this top rung, and I like to actually have the other one on. So I'm going to turn back on the small deer, and once again the shadow is now on top of the real deer. So I'm going to drag that below it in the layers palette. Okay, now I'm on the shadow layer. Let's do that again. Edit, transform, distort. Okay, now I'm going to take the top middle box and I'm just going to pull down to distort that shadow onto the ground. Okay, and then you can play around with making it bigger if you wanted to, or stretching it, but I'm just going to pull mine straight down. I'm going to click the check mark. All right, now with my move tool, I'm going to move it a little bit to try to line up the feet. And if I can't get the feet lined up perfectly, I'm going to distort it, warp it. Edit, transform, warp. Okay, and now I'm going to just kind of pull just a teeny bit to get the feet to line up. Okay, that looks better. Click the check mark. Now it's time to reduce the opacity on that shadow layer. All right, I did the other one around 50, 51. Okay, all right, and now I'd like to blur it a little bit. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. All right, and I did 2 last time, so I'll just go ahead and type in 2 pixels. And okay. All right, so now I've got my 2 shadows making my deer look like they actually exist there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Now it's time to add some more images. I have an owl already, so I'm going to go open that up. File, open. And I'll look for my owl photo. Okay, remember I'm opening it up in a separate document because it maintains the resolution, but let's go check the size. Image size. And this is really big, right? So if you want to make sure that Photopea runs faster, you could change it. So this says mine is 28 inches by 42. I'm going to reduce it just a little bit so that I can select it faster. So I think I'll move this down. My document's 10 inches by 8 inches. So how about I go ahead and make it just a teeny bit bigger? I'll say 15. And if you click away, it should reduce the height automatically. And I'll click OK. All right, so now it's a little smaller and hopefully Photopea will run a little faster. I'm going to try my quick selection tool. Okay, and I'll go ahead and paint over the owl to try and see if it selects it. All right, it got a little bit of the background again. So I could try another tool like my magnetic lasso, or I could try doing that refine edge again. It's up to you. I could also make my brush size smaller on the quick select, and I'm going to click minus, and I'm going to try subtracting from the selection a little bit, and then kind of go back and forth. I'm back to the plus sign, which means add to my selection. All right, so it's really adding too much. So I'm just going back and forth, sort of adding, subtracting, making my brush size real small. That helps give me a little bit more control. All right, that selection looks a little bit better. I can tell that there might be a teeny bit that I didn't get, but I'm going to copy it and see how it looks when I paste it. Control C or Command C. I'm going to go back to this document now. I'm going to paste it. By the way, I want to paste it on the top, so I'm going to make sure I'm on the top layer. Control V or Command V. All right, there he is. He's really big. I'm going to resize it. Edit. Free transform. All right, I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard so I don't distort. Hold Shift, drag a corner. All right, and put him in an interesting spot. Check mark. Okay, so at this point, keep adding different photos. I'm going to go ahead and add one more photo. I'm going to deselect this. All right, good. And I'm going to add one more photo. I'm going to do my lightning and do a blending overlay. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and open my lightning photo that I already collected from unsplash.com. All right, I'm going to go ahead and grab the whole photo. Take a look. I'm going to get my rectangle selection tool. I'm going to drag a selection around all of it. Maybe not the black part there, just the part that has the lightning. I don't need to select it out. This is the really nice part about layer blending modes. So we're not going to select the lightning out of the layer. Let's go ahead and just select the whole image, copy it. Let's go back to your document. I want it on the top. So let's put it, make sure you are on your top layer, and let's paste it. Okay, so now my lightning is obviously taking up the whole picture. Now I'm going to go ahead and reduce the opacity a little bit of the lightning picture, and as you can see, it's now see-through, and it's still kind of taking over the whole image, and I can barely see my other stuff. So I am going to play around with the layer blending modes. So right here at the top of your layers palette, drop down where it says normal and play around with some different layer blending modes. There's dissolve, darken, and as you can see, it starts interacting with the layers below it. There's multiply. Multiply actually shows off the lightning but kind of darkens the rest of the image. Color burn really makes your colors heavily saturated. Okay, so play around with these and find one that you think looks pretty interesting, but still believable, still blends in nicely. Usually overlay is a good one to try, or soft light when you want something to look real natural. Or if you want it to look interesting, here's hard light. I kind of like that. All right, I think I'm gonna stick with hard light, but I'm gonna reduce the opacity a little bit more. All right, and then I think I might kind of play around with moving the lightning. Okay, all right, so from this point, add some more photos. Make sure you have a minimum of 5 new photos plus your background image. So that means a minimum of 6 photos. Make sure you played around with cast shadows, layer blending modes, changing the hue. All right, you can add other things if you want, like digital painting. When you're ready and you've finished everything, let's go to File, Save as PSD, so that you save your document with all the layers. Make sure to save that to your Google Drive and save it somewhere else as a backup. Now, when you're completely done, you're going to flatten your image, layer at the top, flatten image, and that has flattened all my layers. I can no longer edit because I'm ready to save as a JPEG. Let's go to File, Export as, JPEG. All right, make sure to have your quality higher than 80% and save it. All right, so now I've saved my PSD and I've saved my flattened JPEG, and I'm ready to turn this into the Google Classroom. Bye, guys.